Well, hello everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me today. I want to talk about the water in the medieval Fenland, so we're trying to work out how this thing works. So that's the title that I've got for you today. And this is what I'm going to do. I'm not going to talk about two things. I'd like to say something about medieval Fenlanders and where their money came from. I'd like to talk then about how water management contributed to that wealth, and say something about the technicalities, and then move on to a conclusion. So that's really where we're going over the next 20 minutes. So, what am I not going to talk about? I'm not going to talk about reclamation, although I would like to say in passing that although there was reclamation, and not a great deal of it, it was generally reclamation for pasture rather than for arable. And I'm not going to talk about large-scale water movement. So this is David Hall's very well-known diagram of the movement of the River Nene from its old course. Oh dear, that's not very good, is it? Here we go. Okay, start again. So this is the old course of the River Nene going through March over there. There's Wisbech, Peterborough, and Ely over here. The old course became silted up. Water couldn't travel along it, and so a new course was dug like that, and I'm not going to talk about that either. So that's why the Nene has got these big banks, because it's a canal in March. Okay, so what do we know about the medieval Fenlanders? We know that they were wealthy, and the Fenland churches are a good illustration of that. There's recently been some mapping of the details of that wealth. So just to show you two maps, the one on the left shows the number of taxpayers in each community in the early to mid 14th century. So you can see, if you're looking at Finland, there are a lot of people living in Finland, a lot of them. Were they all rich? Well, the next slide shows no. Actually, they weren't poor, but they were what you might call of the middling sort. So there are a lot of people paying a reasonable amount of tax, rather than a few people paying a lot of tax. So there must be something about the Fens that enables people to make money. And that's really where I want to go, and where I want to end up is how water contributes to that wealth. So where did their money come from? It's well known throughout the period of the wetland fen that men who had very little land on the uplands, very little arable, perhaps just a house and a backyard, could make a very good living provided they had access to common rights. And common rights entitle you to graze your animals on the fen. So that when one looks at manorial records, most people had 4 or 5 cattle, but only half of them had sheep. So their money is coming from cattle. But what are they getting from cattle that is bringing them in more money, more income, than somebody with 30 acres who lives in South Cambridgeshire? Here are common rights in the fen. So this map, there's Wisbech, Ely, and Peterborough, and the white dots are the islands in the peat fen, and the grey is the peat fen. These pins, everywhere where there's the head of a pin, that's where the village was, and everywhere where there's the sharp end of a pin, that's where they were entitled to take their animals to graze, their cattle. And so when you look at the map of common rights in the medieval fen, you can see that how many communities were supported through common rights. So they're using the cattle for dairying. And what is it about the fens that makes such good cheese and butter? And the consensus is that it was due here, this is an 18th century source, but solely to the nature of the herbage on the commons. That is, the fen hay was so rich that it produced excellent productivity from the cattle, and the quality of the product itself was high. So It's about the fen grazing. That's where we're going with this. They were reasonably well off. They were well off because they had the common rights. They used the common rights to graze their cattle, and they made money from the cattle because the fen grazing was so good. Okay, you all with me now? Good. So how do they make sure from one year to the next that their cattle are going to be able to graze on grass that is good enough? And the answer lay in the water. Those grounds that lie lowest, the lowest fens, and those are often and longest overflown in the winter season, so those that are flooded in winter are the most fertile grounds and yield the best yearly value. So now this is a 17th century source, so I can't believe it wasn't true in the Middle Ages as well. Effectively, you're talking about natural water meadows. So they're flooded in winter, that brings silts, and that fertilizes the soil, and the grass grows more thickly, and then that produces good food for the cattle, and so then the cattle make good cheese, and you make lots of money. Here's Gooch talking about how they made that fen hay. Fen hay, so you get 2 crops of it, was grown in a black turf, which was purposely inundated until the crop appears above the water. Then the water is let off. So when you think of those pictures of the Fenland skating at Whittlesea, for example, the water wasn't very deep, but it was just deep enough to cover the pasture, and then the new grass, when it appeared above that water, you took the water away. So you let the water on and you let the water off, because there is a key window of 21 days within which the water must be removed or else the grass begins to rot. And that quote was, to my enormous delight, that's the word of a man called James Winslade, who farms on the Somerset Levels. And in the floods of the winter, the early part of 2014, he was on BBC Radio 4, and I was driving around Cambridge, and he said that, and I just screeched to a halt and write it down that very minute before I forgot it. A key window of 21 days. So they are natural water meadows, but if you don't manage the water, you risk your livelihood over the following year. You've got to be able to manage the water off as well as managing it on. And so that's why water management is important. So how does one achieve the right amount of water on your pasture? You don't want too little, because then your grass isn't getting fertilized. Pastures aren't getting fertilized. You have too much, you maybe lose the pasture altogether. How do you achieve the right amount? So everybody knows, my mother says, everybody knows that the stones flew from the Preseli Mountains to Stonehenge. I'm always worried about things that everybody knows. Everybody knows that in Cambridgeshire we have canals which are called loads, and the word comes from lead, to lead water. We have loads for leading water. So everybody knows that in Cambridgeshire the loads are for trade. We all know that. So how come when one looks at the Fenland in the mid-13th century, and this amazing volume is for sale upstairs, this is from the Ely Coucher book, just published. When you look in the Ely Coucher book, how come every parish has got loads of loads? I mean, here in Doddington, there are 6. This map of about 1600, everywhere where there's a bit of dark blue writing, like here and here and here and there and here and there, that's an artificial watercourse. It's a load. I mean, you know, if you're just using them for trade, it's not like handbags. You don't say, well, that load will suit my outfit today. No. You say, I need to get from A to B. Here's the load, that's where I go. You don't actually need 6. You only need 1. So let's look at how loads actually work. And the example is taken from the northeast Cambridgeshire fen edge. So everything that's in brown is dry land. Here's the River Cam running northeast out towards the Wash, and the blue lines run from the dry land to the Cam. And so here's an example in detail. So here's Reach. This is the dry land here. The green, which I hope you can see, is the fen. Here is the lode going out, and I hope you can see that it is fed by a catchwater drain, which runs all the way around the edge of the high land. Now, when you look at the character of that catchwater drain, it's got a very interesting character, which tells you what the lodes are for. I'm going to show you now. Okay, so there's Reach. We're just at the very beginning of the lode up there, looking up the lode towards the Cam. And look, you see the lode, you obviously see the water. That's the fen over there. Look, there's a bank between the lode and the fen. Ha ha ha. Right, so here we are along the catchwater some more. There's the catchwater here, we're about over there. The lode is on our right. The fen is on our left. Between the two, there is a bank. Voila. Right. So, what are they doing with that bank? If the lode is there for catching water to take it out into the fen, what happens when it floods? Clearly at Reach, and actually in any other fen edge settlement, when it floods, they don't mind if the houses flood, but they really mind if the fens flood. That's what the catchwater is for. The catchwater is for taking the water out along the lode so that the fens don't flood. Are they mad? So here we are back. Men with little or no land could support themselves with their rights over the commons. And managing the water onto and off the commons is where we're going with this. So, in that same area, here's the natural drainage leading upwards. You can see these are the little natural streams. What happens when you cut the lodes across them? Whoops, sorry, did we go across? I don't know what happened there. If you cut I'll show you, there we go. When you cut the lodes across them, you interrupt the natural drainage. So you're fine for the water actually in the lodes because that's coming off the catchwater. But the area between the lodes will just gradually fill up with water, partly with groundwater, partly with rain, and if there is any bit where there isn't a catchwater, it'll come in from there. And so you lost your grazing. So in between the lodes, you need a system of smaller cuts to manage the water in the pasture also off. And of course, you can see this at Wicken Fen. Wicken Fen isn't organised for drainage. Wicken Fen is organised for water management. It's quite different. So you get a complex drainage system. So how did they do this in practice in the Middle Ages? Well, unfortunately, most of the fens have been utterly ploughed since drainage, and so very little remains. And what we find are a few fragmentary archaeological bits and pieces and quite a lot of well, actually not very much, but a bit of documentary evidence. So I'm going to quickly take you through that. So this is 4 goats at Tid St Giles. Wisbeach is over here. Here's Crowland. I'll show you that in detail. So here you've got, there are the 4 goats, see 1, 2, 3, 4, and they go underneath the great sea bank which runs around the Wash. The medieval sea bank runs around the Wash, and you can see it, the water goes underneath and comes out the other side and then flows out towards the Wash. Now, how was it actually managed in practice? They used hollowed out tree trunks as pipes. And you hollow it out, and actually elm hollows out fairly naturally, but it doesn't have to be elm. And then you stuff one end in the next, you make 2 pipes, and you stuff one in. It's like that game we used to play with straws when we were children, making a long string with straws. So they had pipes. So this is an example from the mid-16th century. This chap, William Goots, has put a hollow tree into the lode in Lincolnshire, and he's leading water off the lode into his fields, and everybody's getting upset because there's not enough water in the lode. That's effectively what this is about, to the great annoyance and hindrance of the said sewer. And here, of course, at the sea bank, archaeological excavation has found those tree trunks dating to about 1100. So we can be pretty sure they were using those tree trunks. But when you look at the 4 goats on an earlier map, see there they are again, 1, 2, 3, 4. Can you see there's like a little circle with a dot at the end of each one? What is that? I'm going to show you what that is. You're going to be so in love with this. Okay. This is a dam there with a bank like our sea bank. And there's our timber pipe allowing the water to go out into the wash. And then there's a clapper at the end of it. So the tide comes in and it pushes the wood up against, it closes the door. No water comes into the fen because the water from the high tide is pushing that closed. And at low tide, when the seawater retreats, then the water comes out of the pipe, the fresh water that's backed up in the fen comes out of the pipe and falls into the sea. That makes sense? All right, well, let me tell you something really, really interesting. That picture is not from Fenland, much to my regret. It's from Holland, and it dates to about 175 BC. And it's not a one-off. There are other similar systems in France of about the same date. So if there's that sort of thing going on across Europe in the Roman period, and we can find it in the Fenland in 1100 and in 1600 and in Edinburgh in 1700, does it not stand to reason that it was more likely than not that this was a perennial form of managing water across wetlands in northwest Europe, regardless of where you were? That's not exactly rocket science, is it? You know, you could lie in bed at night worrying about how you were going to drain the fields and wake up in the morning and say to your wife over your bowl of gruel, you know, I've just had that amazing moment in the middle of the night, I'm going to try it out. Anyway, so here's another one. This is, there are these words about drainage. So this is Dowsdale Bar near Crowland, again on that map of 1590, and this is what it looks like close up. So there's the bar. It's just something across the river there. And the books say a bar is a stop lock to keep water in one river system at the expense of another. So they're trying to keep water in the southern course here, and they don't mind it flowing out from there this way when they open the locks. Now this map obviously is 1590. However, there was Robert, the son of Everard, who lived at the bar in Ely in 1251. And there are bar dykes and bar weirs in Doddington in 1199. I think we can be pretty sure there were bars across the medieval Fenland. And then finally, there is Clow's Cross. There's the cross. Unfortunately, the Clow isn't shown, but a Clow is as a floodgate. And in 1251, we have John le Clowerer, the man who made the clows, who lived at Willingham. And a Clow is a clap gate fixed to a lock in such a way that the water can only flow in one direction through it. So that if they're not only making the trees and leading the water with the little flappy gate, they've got locks and weirs and dams and ponds. There's a whole system of complex water management just hinted at in the documents about for which there's very little archaeological evidence. We really, really need you to go out and look. And if you find any little bits of rotten wood, you know, Kasha will be thrilled. So it's those grounds that are overflowed the longest that yield the most yearly value. It's about making money from your common rights, and it's about engineering in an extensive wetland landscape using water management, which is collectively constructed for profitable grazing across the medieval period. Yeah, it's interesting, wasn't it?